The shower has been running for 3 hours. Steam fogs the mirrors in cabin 7. Hot water cascades over empty tiles. The other girls assume 17-year-old Sarah Chun is still inside, getting ready for morning devotions at the Christian youth camp. But Sarah Chun is gone. Her bed, perfectly made, hospital corners tucked tight. Her breakfast, untouched scrambled eggs growing cold in the cafeteria. Her fate, about to become one of Georgia's most haunting mysteries. For 24 years, nothing. No leads. No answers. Search dogs found nothing. FBI interviews led nowhere. Her family's desperate pleas fell on deaf ears. Then, in March 2023, someone opened a locked trunk in a basement. What they found inside changed everything. Subscribe now, because this story will shatter everything you thought you knew about the monsters hiding behind religious facades. July 15, 1999, Camp Shepherd's Rest. The gravel crunches under the wheels of the charter bus as it winds through the mountain roads. 47 teenagers from First Baptist Church of Marietta press their faces against the windows, watching the pine trees blur past. Sarah Chun sits in seat 12B, her Sony Walkman playing the same Sixpence None the Richer song on repeat. She's written 3 letters to her boyfriend Marcus already, though the bus hasn't even reached the camp gates. This is going to be the best week ever, her friend Jessica Martinez whispers from the seat behind her. I heard they have a zip line this year. Sarah smiles, but there's something in her dark eyes, a flicker of unease she can't quite name. Maybe it's the way Pastor David Kellerman keeps glancing at her through the rearview mirror, or how camp director Thomas Brennan's welcome letter felt more like a warning than an invitation. At 3:42 p.m., the bus passes beneath a wooden archway carved with the camp's motto, where young souls find their way. The irony would become clear 24 years later. Camp Shepherd's Rest sprawls across 200 acres of pristine wilderness. Established in 1987, it's built to look like a rustic retreat. Log cabins arranged in perfect circles around a central lodge, hiking trails that snake through old-growth forest, a pristine lake reflecting the Georgia sky. But there's something manufactured about its perfection, like a movie set designed to look authentic. The camp handbook, distributed to every camper, contains 17 pages of rules. No unauthorized photography. No exploring alone. No entering restricted areas. No contact with the outside world except through supervised phone calls on Thursday evenings. The handbook emphasizes that these rules exist for safety, for spiritual growth, for the camper's own good. Sarah's cabin assignment is Cabin 7, a structure tucked deeper into the woods than the others. Her counselor is Rebecca Morrison, a 23-year-old seminary student with hollow eyes and a smile that never quite reaches them. Rebecca has been coming to Shepherd's Rest for 6 summers, first as a camper, then as junior staff, now as a counselor. She knows things about this place that would make Sarah's parents drive through the night to bring their daughter home. But Rebecca says nothing as she helps Sarah unpack her duffel bag. She simply watches as Sarah arranges her toiletries on the shared bathroom shelf, her hands shaking slightly as she places her shampoo next to the others. The rules are important here, Rebecca finally says, her voice barely above a whisper. They keep us safe. They keep us protected. Sarah nods, not understanding why Rebecca's words feel like a threat. That first night, as Sarah lies in her narrow bunk listening to the sounds of the Georgia wilderness, she hears something that doesn't belong. A mechanical whir, almost inaudible, coming from somewhere above her head. When she mentions it to Jessica the next morning, her friend laughs. You're being paranoid. It's probably just the air conditioning. But Camp Shepherd's Rest doesn't have air conditioning. It prides itself on being rustic, authentic, stripped of modern conveniences. The sound Sarah heard was something else entirely, something that would explain everything, if only she had known where to look. Detective Maria Santos has been retired for 3 years when the call comes. She's in her kitchen in Decatur, making coffee and reading the morning paper, when her phone buzzes with a number she doesn't recognize. Detective Santos? This is attorney Michael Chun. I need to speak with you about my daughter Sarah. The coffee cup slips from Maria's fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor. She remembers Sarah Chun. How could she forget? The teenager who vanished from a church camp in 1999, launching one of the most frustrating investigations of Maria's career. A case that was quietly closed after 6 months, despite Maria's protests. Mr. Chun, I'm retired now. If you need. They found something, he interrupts. Please. I need the detective who actually cared about finding my daughter. 3 hours later, Maria stands in the basement of a house in Cumming, Georgia, watching crime scene technicians photograph the contents of a padlocked trunk. The homeowner, retired camp director Thomas Brennan, died of a heart attack the previous week. His daughter, clearing out his belongings, found the trunk hidden behind a false wall in the basement. Inside, 43 VHS tapes, each labeled with dates and names. A leather journal filled with meticulous handwriting, photographs, and a small digital recording device that shouldn't have existed in 1999. We've only watched 3 of the tapes, says Detective James Park, who's leading the investigation. But it's enough to know we're dealing with something bigger than a missing person case. Maria picks up the journal. The handwriting is precise, clinical. She reads the first entry. Subject 23, Sarah Chun, age 17, arrived July 15, 1999. Physical description: Asian female, 5 feet 4 inches, 118 pounds, dark hair, brown eyes. Psychological profile: submissive tendencies, people-pleasing behavior, possible attachment issues. Assigned to Phase 2 conditioning. Cabin 7. Counselor: R. Morrison. Estimated timeline: 96 hours. The journal contains 47 similar entries, spanning from 1995 to 2002, each one detailing a different teenager who attended Camp Shepherd's Rest, each one outlining a systematic program of psychological manipulation, surveillance, and abuse. Jesus Christ, Maria whispers. How many kids went through this place? Detective Park consults his notes. Shepherd's Rest operated for 15 years. Approximately 800 campers total. We're trying to track down every single one. But Maria is already thinking about the ones they'll never find. The ones who disappeared like Sarah. The ones who might still be out there, somewhere, carrying secrets that could destroy them. The first tape is labeled Sarah Chun Day 1 Intake. Maria slides it into the VCR with hands that shake slightly. The image that appears on the screen is grainy, shot from above, showing the interior of Cabin 7. Sarah sits on her bunk, unpacking, unaware that her every movement is being recorded. The camera was hidden in the ceiling, Detective Park explains. We found the whole system still intact. Every cabin had multiple cameras. The main lodge had a monitoring room that looked like something out of a spy movie. On the screen, Sarah looks up suddenly, as if she's heard something. The same mechanical where she mentioned to Jessica the next morning. The sound of her life being recorded, cataloged, prepared for something unspeakable. Maria watches as Sarah's counselor, Rebecca Morrison, enters the frame. Even through the poor video quality, Maria can see the woman's distress. Rebecca moves like someone who's been broken and rebuilt, her gestures mechanical, her smile painted on. We need to find Rebecca Morrison, Maria says. She might be the key to understanding what really happened here. What they don't know yet is that Rebecca Morrison has been hiding in plain sight for 24 years, living under an assumed name, working as a children's therapist in Nashville. She's been waiting for this moment, preparing for the day when someone would finally discover the truth about Camp Shepherd's Rest. And she's been keeping a secret that will change everything they thought they knew about Sarah Chun's disappearance. July 19, 1999, Day 5 of camp. Sarah's journal, recovered from her cabin after her disappearance, contains entries that grow increasingly disturbing as the days progress. Written in her careful handwriting, the pages reveal a teenager slowly realizing that something is very wrong at Camp Shepherd's Rest. July 16th, Day 2. The counselors watch us all the time. I know that sounds paranoid, but I can't feel eyes on me even when I'm alone. Rebecca seems scared of something. She keeps looking over her shoulder. During craft time, she whispered to me that I should be careful about what I say and do. When I asked why, she just walked away. July 17th, Day 3. I tried to call Mom and Dad during phone time, but they said the line was busy. Every time. Jessica said the same thing happened to her. How can all the lines be busy? Something is wrong here. I want to go home. July 18th, Day 4. I found a room in the lodge that isn't on any of the maps. It's behind the kitchen, down a hallway that looks like it dead ends but doesn't. The door was locked, but I could hear sounds coming from inside. Voices. And something else. Something that sounded like crying. I need to get back in there. The final entry is dated July 19th, 1999. The day Sarah Chun vanished. I know what this place really is now. I know why some kids who come here never go home. I know why Rebecca looks at me like she's already mourning. I found the room. I saw the tapes. I saw what they do to us. If something happens to me, if I disappear, look for the others. Look for the ones who came here and never left. They're still here. Somewhere. And they're not the only ones. I'm going to try to run tonight. If I can make it to the main road, maybe I can flag down a car. Maybe I can get help. If I don't make it, please tell my parents I love them. Tell them I wasn't stupid. Tell them I was brave. The night is pretend here. Everything is pretend. But the danger is real. The journal ends there. Sarah's bed was found empty the next morning, her belongings still neatly arranged, her breakfast cooling on the cafeteria table. The official report states that she ran away during the night, probably getting lost in the vast wilderness surrounding the camp. But Maria Santos knows better now. She's seen the monitoring room. She's watched the tapes. She knows that nobody disappeared from Camp Shepherd's Rest without Thomas Brennan knowing exactly where they went. Present day, March 2023. Rebecca Morrison lives in a small apartment in Nashville, 30 miles from the nearest church. She hasn't attended a religious service in 24 years. She hasn't been able to sleep through the night since the summer of 1999. She works as a trauma therapist, specializing in survivors of religious abuse, and everyone assumes her expertise comes from academic study. They don't know that she learned everything she knows about psychological manipulation at Camp Shepherd's Rest. When Detective Santos calls, Rebecca is with a client, a young woman who was abused by her youth pastor. The irony isn't lost on her. She spent her entire adult life trying to repair the damage done by places like Shepherd's Rest, but she's never been able to repair herself. Ms. Morrison? This is Detective Maria Santos with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with you about Camp Shepherd's Rest. Rebecca's hands begin to shake. She's been expecting this call for 24 years, but she's still not prepared for it. I can't, she whispers. I can't talk about that place. Ms. Morrison, we found Thomas Brennan's records. We know what happened there. We know about the surveillance, the conditioning, the missing children. We need your help to understand what really happened to Saracen. Rebecca closes her eyes, and suddenly she's 17 again, standing in the monitoring room beneath the lodge, watching screens filled with images of sleeping teenagers. Thomas Brennan's hand is on her shoulder, his voice honey-sweet in her ear. This is how we keep them safe, Rebecca. This is how we protect them from themselves. You understand, don't you? You're special. You're one of the ones who can help us help them. I'll be there in 4 hours, Rebecca tells Detective Santos and hangs up the phone. The drive from Nashville to Cumming takes her through the mountains where Camp Shepherd's Rest once stood. The facility was closed in 2002, after a series of lawsuits and insurance claims. The official reason was financial difficulties, but Rebecca knows the truth. Too many parents started asking questions. Too many former campers started remembering things they weren't supposed to remember. The camp buildings are gone now, demolished in 2010. But the monitoring room was built into the bedrock beneath the lodge. It's still there, hidden beneath 20 feet of earth and concrete, filled with equipment that recorded every moment of every camper's life. Rebecca meets Detective Santos at the Cumming police station. The detective is older than she expected, with gray hair and kind eyes that have seen too much. She reminds Rebecca of her own mother, who died not knowing why her daughter never came home the same from summer camp. I need you to understand something, Rebecca begins, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. What happened at Shepherd's Rest wasn't just abuse. It was a program. A systematic method of breaking down young people's personalities and rebuilding them into something else. Something compliant. Something controllable. She tells Detective Santos about the selection process. How certain campers were chosen for special attention based on psychological profiles compiled from their church records, their school transcripts, their family histories. How these campers were placed in specific cabins with specially trained counselors. How they were subjected to sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, and psychological conditioning that would make them more susceptible to authority. The goal was to create a network, Rebecca explains. Young people who would go back to their churches, their schools, their communities, and act as influencers, recruiters. They would identify other vulnerable kids and guide them toward Shepherd's Rest. And you were one of them? Rebecca nods. I was a camper first in 1995. I was selected for the program when I was 15. By the time I was 19, I was helping to run it. I thought I was saving people. I thought I was doing God's work. What changed? Saracen changed everything. She was different from the others. Stronger. More curious. She started asking questions we couldn't answer. She found things she wasn't supposed to find. And when she threatened to expose us, Rebecca's voice breaks. For 24 years, she's carried the weight of what happened to Sarah Chin. For 24 years, she's lived with the knowledge that she could have saved her and chose not to. She didn't run away, Rebecca whispers. She didn't get lost in the woods. She was taken. And I know where. July 19th, 1999, 11:47 p.m. Sarah Chin's escape attempt begins at 11:47 p.m. on July 19th, 1999. She waits until the other girls in cabin 7 are asleep, then slips out through the bathroom window, a route she's been planning for 2 days. The night air is thick with humidity and the sound of crickets. She can smell the pine trees and something else, something chemical and sharp that seems to come from the direction of the lodge. Her plan is simple. Follow the hiking trail to the main road, then hitchhike to the nearest town. From there, she'll call her parents and tell them everything she's discovered about Camp Shepherd's Rest. She's carrying her journal, 3 photographs she stole from the hidden room, and a small tape recorder she found in the lodge basement. But Sarah doesn't know about the motion sensors hidden along the trails. She doesn't know about the infrared cameras that track movement throughout the camp. She doesn't know that Thomas Brennan is waiting for her in the woods, that he's been watching her plan her escape for days. At 12:23 a.m., Sarah reaches the main road. She's made it further than anyone expected. For a brief moment, she allows herself to hope that she's going to escape, that she's going to expose the truth about what happens at Shepherd's Rest. Then she hears the sound of an engine approaching. The van that stops is not driven by a Good Samaritan. It's driven by Pastor David Kellerman, who has been part of the Shepherd's Rest network for 5 years. He's been making these midnight drives whenever a camper gets too close to the truth. Sarah, thank God, he says, stepping out of the van. Everyone's been looking for you. Your parents are worried sick. Sarah backs away from the van, her instincts screaming danger. But Pastor Kellerman is someone she's known since childhood. He baptized her when she was 12. He performed her grandmother's funeral service. He's supposed to be safe. I'm not going back, she says, her voice shaking. I know what you're doing to us. I know about the room. I know about the tapes. Pastor Kellerman's expression changes. The kindly concern disappears, replaced by something cold and calculating. I'm sorry, Sarah. I truly am. But the work we're doing is too important. You're going to have to come with me. What happens next is recorded on Pastor Kellerman's dashboard camera, a device installed in all vehicles used by Shepherd's Rest staff. Sarah runs. She makes it 50 yards before Pastor Kellerman catches up with her. The struggle is brief. Sarah is sedated with a syringe Pastor Kellerman produces from his jacket pocket. At 12:47 a.m., Sarah Chin is loaded into the van, unconscious but alive. She's driven not back to the camp, but to a facility 30 miles away, a place that doesn't appear on any official records, a place that exists solely to handle problems like Sarah Chin. The facility is called the Sanctuary. It's where the children who ask too many questions are taken. It's where they're held until the program can decide what to do with them. Some are eventually released, their memories adjusted through a combination of drugs and psychological manipulation. Others are sent to affiliated facilities in other states, where they become part of different programs. And some, like Sarah Chin, are never seen again. The Sanctuary still exists. That's what Detective Santos discovers when she follows the trail from Thomas Brennan's journal to a compound in rural Tennessee. The facility is registered as a private residential treatment center for troubled youth. It's been operating under different names for 30 years, always just outside the reach of state oversight. The current director is Dr. Amanda Pierce, a woman who worked at Shepherd's Rest as a psychologist from 1998 to 2002. According to Brennan's records, she was responsible for the therapeutic interventions used on campers who showed signs of resistance to the program. Detective Santos arrives at the sanctuary unannounced, with a search warrant and a team of federal agents. The facility looks benign from the outside, a collection of brick buildings surrounded by well-maintained grounds. But inside, they find something that makes Santos' blood run cold. The basement level contains a series of isolation rooms, each equipped with surveillance equipment and medical restraints. The walls are lined with cabinets containing thousands of patient files dating back to 1989. And in the deepest part of the basement, behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only, they find the long-term residents. There are 12 of them, adults now, living in conditions that can only be described as captivity. They range in age from 35 to 42. All of them are former campers from various programs affiliated with Shepherd's Rest. All of them have been at the sanctuary for decades, hidden from the outside world, their existence known only to the staff who keep them sedated and compliant. Sarah Chin is not among them, but her presence lingers in the files, in the treatment notes, in the video recordings that document her final weeks. Detective Santos watches the tapes in a conference room at the FBI field office in Atlanta. The recordings show Sarah in a small, windowless room, being questioned by Dr. Pierce and Thomas Brennan. The sessions are labeled therapeutic intervention, but they're clearly interrogations. "Tell us about the photographs you took," Dr. Pierce says in one recording. "Tell us what you plan to do with them." Sarah, visibly drugged but still defiant, shakes her head. "I won't tell you anything, and someone will come looking for me. My parents will never stop looking." "Your parents think you ran away," Brennan replies. "They think you were troubled, rebellious. They're not looking for you here." The recordings span 3 weeks. Day by day, Santos watches Sarah's resistance break down. The drugs, the isolation, the constant psychological pressure, it's torture disguised as treatment. By the end, Sarah is barely recognizable as the confident teenager who arrived at Camp Shepherd's Rest. The final recording is dated August 10th, 1999. Sarah sits in the same chair, but she's different now. Her eyes are vacant, her movements mechanical. She's been broken, rebuilt into something that will never threaten the program again. "I'm ready to cooperate," she says in a voice that sounds nothing like her own. "I'm ready to help." The recording ends there. According to the files, Sarah was transferred to a facility in Montana the next day. The facility closed in 2003, its records destroyed. The trail goes cold. But Detective Santos knows that Sarah Chin, or whatever she became, is still out there somewhere. Living under a different name, carrying secrets that could destroy lives, shaped by trauma into something unrecognizable. The question is, how many others are there? How many Sarah Chins are walking around, hidden in plain sight, products of a system that turned lost children into weapons? The investigation into Camp Shepherd's Rest reveals a network that spans dozens of states and involves hundreds of individuals. What began as a missing person case has become a federal investigation into organized child abuse, human trafficking, and psychological warfare conducted under the guise of religious education. FBI Special Agent Linda Torres leads the task force from a command center in Atlanta. The walls are covered with maps, photographs, and timelines connecting various religious camps, boarding schools, and treatment facilities. Red strings link locations where children disappeared. Blue strings connect individuals who worked at multiple facilities. Yellow strings mark the flow of money between organizations. The pattern that emerges is horrifying in its scope and sophistication. Camp Shepherd's Rest was just one node in a network that included at least 47 facilities across the United States. Each facility operated independently but shared resources, personnel, and most importantly, children. This wasn't random abuse, Agent Torres explains to Detective Santos. This was a systematic program to create a generation of psychologically compromised individuals who could be controlled and manipulated into adulthood. The ultimate goal was to infiltrate churches, schools, and communities with people who would advance a specific agenda. The agenda, according to documents recovered from Thomas Brennan's home, was to create a shadow network of religious fundamentalists who would work to undermine secular education, democratic institutions, and social progress. The children who survived the program were placed in strategic positions as teachers, counselors, social workers, and religious leaders, where they could identify and recruit the next generation of victims. Rebecca Morrison provides crucial insight into how the network operated. She spends weeks with investigators, detailing the psychological techniques used to break down resistant campers and rebuild them as compliant assets. The process was based on research conducted in the 1950s and 1960s, refined through decades of experimentation on vulnerable children. The goal was to create what they called hollow vessels, Rebecca explains. People who looked normal on the surface but had been programmed to respond to specific triggers. They could live normal lives for years, decades even, and then be activated when needed. The activation process was sophisticated. Former campers were monitored through a network of handlers, people who stayed in touch under the guise of friendship or professional relationships. When a former camper was needed for a specific task, they would be contacted and given a series of phrases that would trigger their conditioning. The scary thing is that most of them didn't know they were being controlled, Rebecca continues. They thought they were making their own choices. They thought they were following their own beliefs. But really, they were just responding to programming that had been embedded in their minds decades earlier. The investigation reveals that the network was responsible for numerous incidents that were never connected: the election of fundamentalist school board members in various districts, the harassment of teachers who taught evolution or sex education, the infiltration of secular organizations by religious extremists, and the systematic abuse of children in facilities across the country. Some former campers were programmed to identify and report on classmates who showed signs of independent thinking. Others were trained to recruit vulnerable children for the program. Still others were positioned to provide support and cover for the network's activities. The most disturbing discovery is that the network is still active. Many of the facilities have closed, but the people who ran them have simply moved on to other organizations. The techniques developed at places like Shepherd's Rest are being used in churches, schools, and treatment centers across the country. We're not just dealing with historical abuse, Agent Torres tells the task force. We're dealing with an ongoing conspiracy that has been operating for decades. The children who were abused in the 1990s are adults now, many of them in positions of authority. They're perpetuating the cycle, often without realizing it. The task force identifies 847 individuals who attended camps affiliated with the network. Of these, 312 are confirmed dead, a death rate far higher than the general population. Another 156 are missing, their last known locations untraceable. The remaining 379 are alive, but many show signs of severe psychological trauma. The dead include a disproportionate number of suicides, overdoses, and accidents. The missing include dozens of young adults who simply vanished from their communities, leaving behind confused families and no forwarding addresses. But it's the living who present the greatest challenge. Many of them have no conscious memory of their abuse. They've been conditioned to forget, to repress, to explain away their trauma as normal childhood experiences. Approaching them requires extreme care, as the wrong word or phrase could trigger responses that range from panic attacks to violent behavior. These people are victims, Agent Torres emphasizes. But they're also potentially dangerous. They've been turned into weapons without their knowledge or consent. Our job is to help them remember what was done to them, to break the conditioning and to heal. But we have to be very careful about how we do it. The investigation faces another challenge. Many of the network's victims are now in positions of power and influence. They're judges, politicians, police officers, teachers, and religious leaders. Approaching them means potentially exposing their conditioning, which could destroy their careers and their families. We're walking a tightrope, Agent Torres admits. We want to help these people, but we also have to protect the communities they serve. Some of them may be making decisions that harm others without realizing it. Others may be consciously working to advance the network's agenda. The case becomes even more complex when investigators realize that some of the network's victims have gone on to create their own programs, perpetuating the cycle of abuse. They've opened schools, camps, and treatment centers where they're using the same techniques that were used on them. Hurt people, Rebecca Morrison observes. The system was designed to create a self-perpetuating cycle of abuse. The victims become perpetrators, often without realizing it. They think they're helping children, but they're actually continuing the program that destroyed their own lives. The search for Sarah Chin takes Detective Santos across the country. Armed with new information from the sanctuary files, she follows a trail that leads from Tennessee to Montana, then to Colorado, then to a small town in Oregon where another facility once operated. Each location reveals new horrors. In Montana, she finds the ruins of the Mountain View Rehabilitation Center, where Sarah was supposedly transferred in 1999. The facility was destroyed in a fire in 2003, just months before a state investigation was scheduled to begin. The fire was ruled accidental, but Detective Santos finds evidence of accelerant in the basement where the records were kept. In Colorado, she visits the Horizon Academy, a boarding school for troubled teens that operated from 1995 to 2010. The school's director, Dr. Richard Voss, was a former colleague of Thomas Brennan. The facility specialized in therapeutic wilderness programs that took troubled teens into the mountains for weeks at a time. 17 students died in the program, all from supposedly natural causes. But it's in Oregon that Detective Santos finds the first real lead. The Renewal Center operated from 2000 to 2015, specializing in long-term residential treatment for young adults with psychological disorders. The center was run by Dr. Margaret Hartwell, a woman who appears in several photographs from Camp Shepherd's Rest. The center's records are more complete than those of other facilities. They show that Sarah Chin was admitted in August 1999, transferred from the sanctuary under the name Mary Adams. She was listed as a 20-year-old patient with severe dissociative identity disorder and treatment-resistant depression. The records paint a picture of a young woman who had been systematically broken down and rebuilt. Sarah's personality had been fractured, her memory suppressed, her identity erased. She was described as highly compliant and responsive to therapeutic intervention. For 3 years, Sarah lived at the Renewal Center, undergoing daily therapy sessions that were actually continued conditioning. The goal, according to the treatment notes, was to create a stable alternate personality that could function in society while remaining loyal to the program. In 2002, the records show that Sarah was released into the custody of a family friend named Robert Sinclair. Sinclair was actually a handler, someone trained to monitor and control former program participants. He was given a new identity, a job, and a place to live. She was now Rebecca Adams, a 23-year-old woman with a fabricated past and a mission she didn't consciously understand. Detective Santos tracks Robert Sinclair to a small town in Washington state, where he died in 2018. Before his death, he had been running a group home for troubled youth. The group home was closed after allegations of abuse, but no charges were ever filed. Sinclair's records, found in his home after his death, revealed that he was responsible for monitoring 12 former program participants. Each of them had been given new identities and specific assignments. Some were placed in schools as teachers or counselors. Others were sent to social service agencies. Still others were positioned in religious organizations. Sarah Chin, now Rebecca Adams, was placed in a small town in Idaho, where she was given a job at a crisis counseling center. Her assignment was to identify vulnerable young people and guide them toward appropriate resources that were actually recruitment tools for the network. The trail leads Detective Santos to Caldwell, Idaho, where she finds the crisis center where Sarah/Rebecca worked from 2002 to 2019. The center's director, Dr. James Mueller, is initially cooperative, but his demeanor changes when Santos mentions Rebecca Adams. Rebecca was one of our best counselors, he says, his voice tight with tension. She had a special gift for working with troubled youth. She really understood their pain. Santos notices that Dr. Mueller's hands are shaking slightly as he speaks. She recognizes the signs. He's another victim of the network, someone who's been conditioned to protect the program at all costs. Where is Rebecca now? Santos asks. She left in 2019, Dr. Mueller replies. Personal reasons. She said she needed to find herself, to remember who she used to be. The phrase, remember who she used to be, is significant. According to Rebecca Morrison, it's a trigger phrase used to activate memories in program participants. Someone had contacted Sarah/Rebecca and begun the process of breaking her conditioning. Santos digs deeper into the crisis center's records and finds something disturbing. Over the course of 17 years, 43 young people who were counseled by Rebecca Adams subsequently disappeared. The disappearances were spread across different states and different time periods, making it unlikely that anyone would notice the pattern. But Detective Santos notices. She realizes that Sarah Chin, the victim who had tried to expose the network, had been turned into one of its most effective operators. For nearly 2 decades, she had been identifying and recruiting vulnerable young people, feeding them into the same system that had destroyed her own life. The thought makes Santos sick. Sarah hadn't been killed. She had been turned into a weapon, programmed to perpetuate the cycle of abuse that had destroyed her own childhood. She was both victim and perpetrator, trapped in a role she didn't consciously understand but couldn't escape. The question now is, where is Sarah Chin? What happened to her after she left the crisis center in 2019? And most importantly, is she still dangerous, or has she finally broken free from the conditioning that controlled her for 2 decades? The woman who was once Sarah Chin sits in a small cabin in the mountains of Northern California, staring at a journal she's been writing for 4 years. The journal is filled with fragments of memories, pieces of a life that was stolen from her when she was 17 years old. She knows her name is Sarah Chin. She knows she disappeared from Camp Shepherd's Rest in 1999. She knows she was held at a facility called the Sanctuary, where her mind was broken and rebuilt. She knows she spent years living as Rebecca Adams, working at a crisis center in Idaho, doing terrible things to vulnerable young people. But she doesn't know everything. The conditioning runs deep, and even now, after 4 years of fighting to remember, there are gaps in her memory that may never be filled. The awakening began in 2019, when a former program participant named David Kim contacted her at the crisis center. David had been at Camp Shepherd's Rest in 1997, 2 years before Sarah. He had escaped the network's control and spent years tracking down other survivors. "Do you remember being 17? He asked her during their first phone call. "Do you remember a place called Camp Shepherd's Rest?" The questions hit Sarah like physical blows. For the first time in 20 years, she felt something crack inside her mind. Images flashed through her consciousness: a cabin in the woods, a girl named Jessica, a journal hidden under a mattress. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice shook as she spoke. "Your name is Sarah Chin," David continued. "You were born in Marietta, Georgia. Your parents are Michael and Linda Chin. You have a younger brother named Jason. You love to read. You wanted to be a journalist. You were brave enough to fight back against something terrible." Each word was like a key unlocking a door in Sarah's mind. The Rebecca Adams persona began to fracture, revealing the girl who had been buried beneath 20 years of conditioning. That night, Sarah/Rebecca fled the crisis center and drove aimlessly through the mountains, her mind reeling with recovered memories. She remembered the real reason she had left Camp Shepherd's Rest, not as a runaway, but as a prisoner. She remembered the sanctuary, the drugs, the months of psychological torture that had torn her original personality apart. And she remembered what she had done afterward. The young people she had identified and steered toward the network's recruiters. The vulnerable teenagers she had betrayed, just as she had been betrayed. The cycle of abuse she had perpetuated without understanding what she was doing. The guilt nearly destroyed her. For weeks, she considered suicide, unable to live with the knowledge of what she had become. But David Kim found her and brought her to a safe house in California, where other survivors were learning to heal from their trauma. "You're not responsible for what they made you do," David told her. "You were a victim, not a perpetrator. They used you just like they used all of us." But Sarah knew the truth was more complicated. She had been both victim and perpetrator, trapped in a role that the network had designed for her. The young people she had betrayed were victims too, and their blood was on her hands whether she had understood what she was doing or not. Over the next 4 years, Sarah worked with a therapist named Dr. Elena Vasquez, who specialized in helping survivors of systematic psychological abuse. Dr. Vasquez had been studying the network for decades, documenting the techniques used to break down and rebuild human personalities. "The process they used on you is called trauma-based mind control," Dr. Vasquez explained. "It's a form of psychological warfare that was developed during the Cold War and later adapted for use on civilian populations. The goal is to create multiple personalities within a single individual, each with different memories, beliefs, and behavioral patterns." Sarah learned that the Rebecca Adams persona had been carefully constructed to serve the network's purposes. Rebecca was compliant, helpful, and trusted by the community. She was also programmed to identify and recruit vulnerable young people, though she wasn't consciously aware of this mission. The beautiful thing about the programming, from their perspective, is that the victims don't know they're being controlled, Dr. Vasquez continued. They think they're making their own choices. They think they're helping people. But really, they're just following instructions that were embedded in their subconscious decades earlier. The therapy was painful and slow. Sarah had to confront not only the trauma of her own abuse, but also the knowledge that she had been used as a weapon against others. She had to learn to forgive herself for things she had done while under the network's control, while also taking responsibility for the harm she had caused. The process was complicated by the fact that some of her memories were real, while others were implanted. The network had given her false memories of a childhood as Rebecca Adams, complete with fabricated trauma that explained her psychological issues. Sorting through what was real and what was programmed required years of careful work. By 2023, Sarah had recovered most of her original memories. She remembered her real parents, her real childhood, her real dreams and aspirations. She also remembered the events at Camp Shepherd's Rest, the escape attempt, and the months of torture that followed. But she still carried the Rebecca Adams persona inside her mind, like a parasite that refused to die. Sometimes, when she was stressed or triggered, she would slip back into Rebecca's patterns of behavior. The conditioning was so deep that it might never be fully erased. When Detective Santos finally tracks her down in June 2023, Sarah is ready to talk. She's been preparing for this moment for years, knowing that eventually someone would discover the truth about the network and come looking for survivors. "I need to tell you about the others," Sarah says when Santos arrives at her cabin. "The 43 young people who disappeared after I counseled them. I need to tell you where they are. The list that Sarah provides to Detective Santos contains 43 names, ages, and last known locations. Each entry represents a young person who sought help at the crisis center in Idaho and was subsequently guided into the network's recruitment pipeline. The names tell a story of systematic predation. Tommy Rodriguez, age 16, struggling with his sexuality in a conservative family. Amanda Foster, age 17, dealing with depression after her parents' divorce. Marcus Johnson, age 15, acting out after his father's death. All of them vulnerable, all of them seeking help, all of them betrayed by the person they trusted most. I thought I was helping them, Sarah tells Detective Santos, her voice breaking. I thought I was connecting them with resources that would make their lives better. I didn't know I was feeding them to the same system that had destroyed me. The recruitment process was subtle and sophisticated. Sarah would identify young people who showed signs of psychological vulnerability, depression, anxiety, trauma, identity issues. She would build trust with them over multiple counseling sessions, gradually steering the conversation toward their relationships with their families and their religious beliefs. Young people who came from strict religious backgrounds were particularly valuable to the network. They were already conditioned to accept authority and to suppress their individual desires in favor of group expectations. They were also more likely to end up at religious camps and programs where they could be accessed by network operators. I would tell them about special programs that could help them, Sarah explains. Summer camps, wilderness therapy, boarding schools, treatment centers. I made it sound like these places were their salvation, the answer to all their problems. The young people Sarah identified were passed along to handlers who would contact their families. The handlers posed as educational consultants, therapists, or religious counselors. They would convince the parents that their troubled teenager needed intensive intervention, preferably at a residential facility. The families, desperate to help their children, would agree to send them to programs that promised to provide healing and guidance. They had no way of knowing that they were actually delivering their children into the hands of the same network that had been systematically abusing young people for decades. Detective Santos begins the grim task of tracking down the 43 names on Sarah's list. What she discovers is a pattern of disappearances, deaths, and psychological destruction that spans over a decade. 12 of the young people are confirmed dead. The causes of death range from suicide to overdose to accidental deaths that occurred at various facilities. The death rate is statistically impossible unless the facilities were deliberately harmful. 18 are missing, their last known locations being various therapeutic programs across the country. Their families believe they are receiving treatment, but many of the facilities they were sent to have since closed or changed names. The remaining 13 are alive, but severely traumatized. Detective Santos and her team locate them in various states, living under assumed names, working in jobs that seem designed to keep them isolated and controlled. One of them is Marcus Johnson, now 28 years old, working as a janitor at a small Christian college in Kansas. When Detective Santos interviews him, she realizes that he's been subjected to the same conditioning process as Sarah. He has no memory of his life before age 18, when he was supposedly saved by the college's intervention program. I was lost before I came here, Marcus tells her, his voice flat and emotionless. I was angry, rebellious, headed for a life of crime. This place gave me purpose, direction, a relationship with God. Detective Santos recognizes the programmed responses. Marcus is repeating phrases that were drilled into him during his conditioning. His entire identity has been rebuilt around serving the institution that destroyed his original personality. Another survivor is Amanda Foster, now 30 years old, working as a counselor at a youth facility in Texas. Like Sarah, she has been turned into a recruiter, identifying vulnerable young people and steering them toward network-affiliated programs. She has no conscious awareness of what she's doing. I love working with kids, Amanda says when Santos interviews her. I feel like I can really understand their pain, you know? I've been where they are. I know what it's like to be lost and hopeless. Detective Santos realizes that Amanda is unconsciously describing her own programming. She understands the pain of the young people she counsels because she's been through the same process herself. But instead of helping them heal, she's perpetuating the cycle of abuse. The pattern repeats itself across the country. Young people who were identified by Sarah at the crisis center were sent to various facilities, where they were broken down and rebuilt as network assets. Some became recruiters like Amanda. Others became enforcers, people who monitored and controlled other survivors. Still others became sources of intelligence, gathering information about potential threats to the network. The most disturbing discovery is that the network has evolved since the 1990s. The techniques developed at places like Camp Shepherd's Rest have been refined and modernized. The new programs use social media, online counseling, and digital surveillance to identify and recruit vulnerable young people. They don't need physical facilities anymore, Sarah explains. They can reach kids through the internet, through social media, through online gaming. They can build relationships with vulnerable young people without ever meeting them in person. The network has also adapted to changing social attitudes. Instead of focusing exclusively on religious camps, they've expanded into secular programs, wilderness therapy, adventure therapy, life coaching, and personal development seminars. The techniques remain the same, but the packaging has been updated for a new generation. Detective Santos realizes that she's not just dealing with a historical conspiracy. She's dealing with an active, evolving network that continues to prey on vulnerable young people. The investigation that began with Sarah Chen's disappearance has revealed a system of abuse that is still operating, still growing, still destroying lives. The question is, how do you fight an enemy that has spent decades learning to hide in plain sight? How do you protect young people from predators who have mastered the art of appearing helpful and trustworthy? The breakthrough comes when Sarah Chen remembers something she had forgotten for 24 years. During her final session with Dr. Vasquez, a memory surfaces that changes everything about the investigation. There was a list, Sarah says suddenly, her eyes wide with shock. In Thomas Brennan's office, there was a list of names. Not just campers, adults, important people, politicians, judges, business leaders, people who had been through the program years earlier and were now in positions of power. The memory is fragmented, distorted by years of conditioning and trauma. But the essential details are clear. The network wasn't just recruiting vulnerable teenagers. They were targeting the children of influential families, people who would grow up to hold positions of authority in government, business, and society. The camps were never the endgame, Sarah continues. They were just the training ground. The real goal was to create a generation of leaders who could be controlled, who would advance the network's agenda without anyone realizing it. Detective Santos contacts FBI Special Agent Torres with this new information. The implications are staggering. If the network has been operating for decades, and if they've been targeting the children of powerful families, then they may have successfully infiltrated the highest levels of American society. Agent Torres assembles a team of analysts to investigate the backgrounds of political and business leaders who attended camps or programs affiliated with the network. What they discover is a web of connections that reaches into Congress, the Supreme Court, major corporations, and influential religious organizations. The network strategy was long-term and sophisticated. They would identify the children of powerful families and ensure they were invited to attend their programs. These children would be subjected to the same conditioning techniques as other participants, but their programming would be tailored to their future roles in society. They weren't trying to create broken, compliant victims, Agent Torres explains. They were trying to create successful, influential leaders who would unconsciously advance the network's agenda. The programming was designed to make them believe they were making their own choices, when really they were following instructions embedded in their subconscious. The investigation reveals that at least 37 current or former members of Congress attended network-affiliated programs as children or young adults. 12 federal judges, including 2 Supreme Court justices, have connections to the network. The CEOs of major corporations, influential religious leaders, and high-ranking military officers all show up in the network's records. The discovery explains many of the political and social developments of the past few decades. The rise of religious fundamentalism in politics, the systematic dismantling of public education, the attacks on democratic institutions, all of these can be traced back to decisions made by leaders who were programmed by the network. We're not just dealing with individual cases of abuse, Agent Torres tells her team. We're dealing with a systematic effort to subvert American democracy. The network has been playing a long game, and they've been winning. The investigation takes on new urgency as the team realizes that the network's influence extends far beyond the camps and facilities they've been investigating. The programming techniques developed on vulnerable teenagers have been scaled up and applied to entire populations through social media, political campaigns, and religious movements. The network has evolved from a collection of abusive facilities into a sophisticated influence operation that can shape public opinion, election outcomes, and government policy. The children who were broken and rebuilt at places like Camp Shepherd's Rest have grown up to become the leaders who are systematically destroying the institutions that could have protected them. Detective Santos finds herself at the center of an investigation that has national security implications. The case that began with a missing teenager has become an expose of a decades-long conspiracy to undermine American democracy from within. But the network is fighting back. As news of the investigation begins to leak, the survivors who have been cooperating with law enforcement start to disappear. Some are found dead, their deaths ruled as suicides or accidents. Others simply vanish, leaving behind confused families and no forwarding addresses. Sarah Chen receives a phone call at her cabin in California. The voice on the other end is familiar, Thomas Brennan, who supposedly died of a heart attack months earlier. "Hello, Sarah," he says, his voice exactly as she remembers it from her nightmares. "I think it's time we had a conversation." Present day. Sarah Chen's hands shake as she holds the phone, hearing the voice of the man who destroyed her life. Thomas Brennan is supposed to be dead, his death certificate, his funeral, his obituary all confirm it. But there he is, speaking to her as if 24 years haven't passed. "You've been very busy, Sarah," Brennan continues, his voice carrying the same honey-sweet tone she remembers from her therapy sessions. "Talking to detectives, sharing our secrets, betraying the people who saved you from yourself." "You're dead," Sarah whispers. "I saw the reports. You died of a heart attack." Brennan's laugh is soft and paternal. "Death is just another tool, Sarah. Another way to control the narrative. The man who died was Thomas Brennan, the camp director, the public face of our work. But the real Thomas Brennan, the one who understood the true purpose of our mission, has been preparing for this moment for years." Detective Santos, who has been monitoring Sarah's phone calls, traces the call to a location in Montana, the same area where the Mountain View Rehabilitation Center once stood. She assembles a team and heads north, but she suspects they're walking into a trap. The conversation between Sarah and Brennan reveals the true scope of the network's operations. Brennan explains that the investigation led by Detective Santos was anticipated and planned for. The trunk in his basement, the files, the evidence, all of it was deliberately left to be found. "We've been in this business for 40 years, Sarah," Brennan says. "We know how to manage exposure. We know how to control the narrative. The investigation you've been helping with isn't shutting us down. It's helping us identify loose ends that need to be tied up." Sarah realizes that she and the other survivors have been used again. By cooperating with law enforcement, they've provided the network with a comprehensive list of everyone who remembered too much, everyone who posed a threat to the organization's continued operation. The beauty of trauma-based programming, Brennan continues, is that it creates multiple layers of control. Even when people think they've broken free, they're still following programming they don't understand. "You thought you were helping to expose us, but you were actually helping us clean house." The phone call is a trigger event, designed to activate deep programming that was embedded in Sarah's mind during her years of conditioning. As Brennan speaks, Sarah feels her consciousness beginning to fragment. The Rebecca Adams persona, which she thought she had overcome, starts to reassert itself. "Come home, Sarah," Brennan says. "Come back to where you belong. Come back to the people who understand you, who made you into something special." Detective Santos arrives at the Montana location to find a compound that looks like a cross between a military base and a religious retreat. The buildings are new, constructed on the site of the old Mountain View facility. Security cameras and motion sensors cover every approach. Armed guards patrol the perimeter. The compound is populated by familiar faces, people who were supposed to be dead, people who were supposed to be in prison, people who were supposed to have disappeared decades ago. Thomas Brennan moves among them like a general commanding an army. Inside the compound, Detective Santos finds the missing survivors. They're housed in comfortable quarters, but they're clearly prisoners. Their programming has been reactivated, and they're being prepared for new assignments that will help the network adapt to the changing investigation. "You've been very helpful, Detective," Brennan tells Santos when she's brought to his office. "Your investigation has identified every potential threat to our organization. Now we can neutralize those threats and continue our work." Santos realizes that the entire investigation has been orchestrated by the network. They allowed themselves to be exposed in order to identify everyone who knew too much about their operations. The survivors who cooperated with law enforcement have been gathered in one place where they can be controlled or eliminated. But there's one thing Brennan doesn't know. Sarah Chen has been working with David Kim and other survivors to develop a plan of their own. They've been expecting this moment, preparing for the network's counterattack. As Sarah drives toward the Montana compound, seemingly under the influence of Brennan's programming, she carries with her a device that will broadcast everything she sees and hears to a secure server. The network's final gambit is about to be exposed to the world. The compound in Montana is a fortress built on decades of stolen childhoods. Sarah drives through the gates at sunset, her mind fractured between her recovered memories and the programming that Brennan has reactivated. Part of her wants to surrender, to return to the safe numbness of being Rebecca Adams. Another part remembers the journal she wrote as a 17-year-old, the promise she made to herself to be brave. Detective Santos watches from a hidden position as Sarah enters the main building. The compound is swarming with activity, people she recognizes from old camp records, survivors who have been turned into enforcers, and new faces that represent the network's evolved operations. Inside the building, Sarah finds herself in a room that looks like a cross between a corporate boardroom and a religious sanctuary. The walls are lined with photographs of graduates from various programs, successful politicians, business leaders, religious figures, all of them products of the network's conditioning. Thomas Brennan sits at the head of a long table, flanked by other network leaders. Some of them are people Sarah remembers from Camp Shepherd's Rest. Others are new faces, representatives of the network's expansion into digital media, social networking, and online influence operations. "Welcome home, Sarah," Brennan says, his voice carrying the same hypnotic quality she remembers from her childhood. "You've been away for too long." But Sarah isn't the same broken teenager who was taken from the camp in 1999. She's spent 4 years recovering her memories, understanding her programming, and preparing for this moment. When she speaks, her voice is steady and strong. "I remember everything," she says. "I remember what you did to me. I remember what you made me do to others. And I remember the promise I made to myself when I was 17 years old." Brennan's expression shifts. This isn't the compliant response he expected. The programming should have taken hold completely, turning Sarah back into the obedient asset she had been for 20 years. "You're confused, Sarah," he says, his voice taking on a harder edge. "The trauma of remembering has damaged your mind. We can help you, just like we helped you before." "You didn't help me," Sarah replies. "You destroyed me. You took a 17-year-old girl who wanted to be a journalist and turned her into a weapon. You made me betray 43 young people who trusted me. You turned me into everything I would have fought against." The room falls silent. Other network leaders shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't supposed to happen. The programming was supposed to be unbreakable. Sarah continues, her voice growing stronger. "But you made one mistake. You taught me to be thorough. You taught me to plan carefully. You taught me to be patient. And I've been using those skills against you." She reaches into her jacket and pulls out a small device, a live streaming unit that has been broadcasting everything to servers around the world. Every word, every face, every detail of the network's operations is being recorded and transmitted to journalists, law enforcement agencies, and survivor support networks. "The world is watching," Sarah says. "Everyone can see what you are, what you've done, what you're still doing. Your secrets are exposed." Brennan's facade finally cracks. The kindly camp director disappears, replaced by something cold and predatory. "You stupid little girl," he snarls. "Do you think this changes anything? Do you think we haven't prepared for this possibility?" He gestures to the photographs on the wall. "We have people in every level of government, every major corporation, every influential organization. They don't even know they're working for us, but they'll protect us instinctively. They'll discredit the investigation, suppress the evidence, silence the survivors." "Maybe," Sarah says, "but they'll have to do it in public now. They'll have to reveal themselves. And when they do, people will start to understand how deep this goes." Outside, Detective Santos coordinates with federal agents who are preparing to raid the compound. But she knows that the real battle isn't being fought with weapons, it's being fought in the realm of public opinion, in the court of public consciousness. The live stream Sarah is broadcasting shows the world exactly what the network has become. Viewers can see the compound, the leaders, the evidence of decades of systematic abuse. They can hear Thomas Brennan's admission of the network's influence over politicians and business leaders. Most importantly, they can see the survivors, people who were broken as children and rebuilt as weapons, now standing up to their abusers and demanding justice. As law enforcement surrounds the compound, Sarah faces Thomas Brennan one final time. The man who destroyed her childhood, who stole her identity, who turned her into an instrument of abuse stands before her, no longer hiding behind a facade of kindness. "You can't undo what we've done," Brennan says. "The people we've programmed, the systems we've influenced, the damage we've caused, it's permanent. Even if you destroy us, our work will continue." Sarah nods. "You're right. The damage is permanent. The people you've hurt will carry those scars forever. But they'll also carry something else, the knowledge that they survived you. The strength that comes from facing their worst nightmare and refusing to be broken by it." She looks around the room at the other network leaders, at the survivors who have been turned into enforcers, at the evidence of decades of systematic abuse. "This ends now," she says. "Not just for me, but for everyone. No more children will be fed into your machine. No more families will be destroyed by your programs. No more vulnerable young people will be turned into weapons." The raid begins as Sarah's words echo through the compound. Federal agents storm the building, arresting network leaders and securing evidence. The survivors are taken into protective custody, where they'll begin the long process of healing and recovery. Thomas Brennan is arrested, but Sarah knows that his capture is only the beginning. The network he built will take years to fully dismantle. The people he programmed will need decades of therapy to heal. The systems he influenced will require fundamental reform. But for the first time in 24 years, Sarah Chin feels something she had forgotten was possible: hope. 6 months after the raid on the Montana compound, Sarah Chin stands in a courtroom in Atlanta, Georgia. She's about to testify in the trial of Thomas Brennan and 14 other network leaders. The charges include conspiracy, human trafficking, child abuse, and domestic terrorism. The courtroom is packed with survivors, families of victims, and journalists from around the world. The case has exposed a network of abuse that spanned decades and reached into the highest levels of American society. 7 members of Congress have resigned. 3 federal judges have recused themselves from all cases. The CEOs of major corporations have stepped down amid revelations about their connections to the network. But the real victory isn't in the courtroom, it's in the hundreds of survivors who have come forward to share their stories. Support groups have formed in cities across the country. Therapists are being trained to help people recover from trauma-based programming. New laws are being passed to protect children from institutional abuse. Sarah's parents, Michael and Linda Chin, sit in the front row of the courtroom. They're older now, marked by 24 years of not knowing what happened to their daughter. But they're here, and they're proud of the woman their daughter has become. "I was 17 years old when I was taken," Sarah says when she takes the stand. "I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to expose injustice and help people understand the truth. In a way, I guess I got my wish." She tells the court about her time at Camp Shepherd's Rest, about the conditioning she endured, about the years she spent as Rebecca Adams unknowingly harming other young people. She describes the network's operations, its goals, its methods. But she also talks about recovery, about healing, about the possibility of rebuilding a life after unimaginable trauma. "The defendants want you to believe that the damage they caused is permanent," Sarah says. "They want you to believe that the people they programmed can never be truly free. But I'm here to tell you they're wrong. Healing is possible. Recovery is possible. Justice is possible." The trial lasts 3 months. Thomas Brennan is convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The other network leaders receive sentences ranging from 25 years to life. But Sarah knows that the real work is just beginning. The network may be dismantled, but the damage it caused will take generations to heal. The children who were abused will need ongoing support. The systems that failed to protect them will need to be rebuilt. Detective Maria Santos, who has come out of retirement to work full-time on survivor support, visits Sarah at her cabin in California. The 2 women sit on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains. "Do you think we got them all?" Santos asks. Sarah considers the question. "No," she says finally. "There are probably other networks, other programs, other people who learned from what Brennan and his people did. The techniques they developed, they're still out there, still being used. So what do we do?" Sarah smiles, and for the first time in 24 years, it reaches her eyes. "We keep fighting. We keep telling the truth. We keep helping people heal. And we never forget that even in the darkest places, there are people who refuse to give up hope." As the sun sets over the California mountains, Sarah Chin thinks about the journal she wrote as a 17-year-old girl. She had promised herself to be brave, to expose the truth, to help others. It took 24 years, but she kept that promise. The night is no longer pretend. The truth has been told. And somewhere, in a crisis center or a group home or a residential facility, a young person is reading about Sarah's story and finding the courage to speak up about their own abuse. The circle of silence has been broken. The work of healing can begin. But in the darkness, in places where vulnerable young people gather, new predators are watching. New systems are being built. New techniques are being developed. The fight for justice never ends. It just takes new forms, finds new voices, discovers new ways to protect the innocent and expose the guilty. Sarah Chin knows this. She's prepared for it. She's been broken and rebuilt, but she's chosen what to become. She's chosen to be a survivor, a fighter, a voice for the voiceless. The camp is gone. The network is dismantled. The truth is told. But the work continues. It always continues. And in the end, perhaps that's the most important truth of all, that no matter how dark the night becomes, there are always people willing to light a candle and show others the way home.